Tonight we're moving on to a new topic in our study, things we can learn from the Psalms about various topics. And so tonight we're going to talk about spirituality. Our culture talks a lot about spiritual things and spirituality and coming in contact with the unknown in a lot of different forms. You know, in our world today, you might see people using crystals and fortune tellers and palm readers and Zen, astrology. I looked up, while I was thinking about this, on Monday as I was studying for this, I looked up my horoscope, right? You ever done that, right? I know we used to read that in the newspaper, right? When we had newspapers. Well, it's online. You can do anything with a Google search, right? So I looked up my horoscope on Monday for the sign of Leo, whatever that means. And it says, if you're able to be involved in a class or any kind of group activity or social situation, be prepared for quarrels to break out among people there, Leo. You could find this counterproductive and useless. You might be tempted to try to break in and put a stop to it. It's better to stay out of it. Work out your frustration by walking home. You'll feel better. And I thought, well, I'm glad at least that was Monday and not today, or otherwise I'd be hoofing it back across the street, heading back into Oliver Crossing. So I don't know if they change. I hope they change every couple of days, or this is going to be an interesting class tonight, right? You're going to get your money's worth. I had the perfect visual aid for tonight. I had saved a fortune cookie from China Wok that, I was going to, do the fortune, right? Because we're talking about spirituality and, the same kind of thing, so like anything else, right? A smartphone can give you a fortune. So I went to a random fortune generator and it says, it is now and in this world that we must live, right? I mean, that's deep, right? So y'all can live by that one for the next week, just like me, whatever that means. So why do these and a lot of other activities exist, and why do people try to tap into the things that are unseen? All of these things wouldn't exist unless there is a sense in people that there's something missing in our lives, that, we're trying to scratch some kind of itch, that we need to do more than just pass through life, that we're grasping for the meaning of life. As I was thinking about this lead-in point to this discussion about spirituality, I thought about Drew's lesson on Sunday night. And you remember he was going through those quotes by those noted atheists. And as I thought about that, those are by the world's standards intellectuals, right? Those are intelligent men. But as we read through their explanations of what might be going on in the unseen world, what might be happening after this life is over, it just sounded like foolishness, didn't it? And that's because a grasp, our best grasping without God is just utter foolishness when it comes to this area of spirituality. There's really nothing outside of God that can satisfy this longing that we have. The deepest part of our beings, we have a need for some things like being fully known by someone else, being fully loved and fully forgiven. And that's what we need God for. The Psalms give us a real special picture into spirituality, into knowing God and knowing who we are in our relationship with God. And we're going to do our typical thing here and look at 3 Psalms tonight and consider what they can tell us about spirituality. The Psalms are, they're like a telescope that give us a view into the great beyond. Have any of you seen these pictures that have come back from the James Webb Space Telescope? I mean, these things are amazing. This is the strongest space telescope that's ever been launched. It's now about 1 million miles away from Earth. And the pictures that they've sent back to NASA are just phenomenal. I was reading something about it. It talked about that that it's seen thousands of galaxies that have never been seen before, and the just the what the resolution on them are really amazing in terms of what's being sent back, and all of that's great, right? And it points us into what all is out there, and it's just mind-boggling what exists beyond us. But it's God's word and the Psalms that tell us what's beyond all of that. And so, I think about a space telescope that's 1 million miles away from us, and that's hard to even grasp. And then what it can shoot and how far away that is from us, and that's even harder to grasp. But one thing that we can grasp is what's beyond all of that is the spiritual realm, and it's God. And I think we can get a feel for that, and we're going to talk about that tonight. If you want to turn to Psalm 114, we're going to start with Psalm 114. This is a relatively short psalm, and our first point tonight is that true spirituality comes from realizing the greatness of God through the marks of His creation. So, first thing that we want to talk about tonight is the relationship that God has to His creation and what we can learn about the spiritual realm through that and the power of God. And so let's read Psalm 114. When Israel went out from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange language, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled, Jordan turned back. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. What ails you, O sea, that you flee? O Jordan, that you turn back? O mountain, that you skip like rams? O hills, like lambs? Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turns the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a spring of water. So this psalm captures some real important points in the history of Israel. And the point of this psalm is to give us a glimpse into the power of God and the fact that the creation, all of creation obeys the Creator. And so, it has, four really major points here that happened in history to point to the power of God. So the first one, about the sea looking back and fled. So, of course, a reference to the Red Sea parting so that the Israelites could cross safely. We read about that in Exodus 14, 21 and 22, where it says, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And so this event led the psalmist to write, the sea looked and fled. And so I think back to all those times I watched the Ten Commandments in Charlton Heston, right? And those great special effects for those days, and that sea parting and the children of Israel walking through. And that's something that just can't happen, right? It defies the laws of nature, but it happens with the power of God. In the same way, the Jordan turned back. And we can read about that in Joshua 3, 16 and 17. Of course, that's when Israel crossed into the promised land. And it says, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, Joshua 3, 16. And the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the water being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So a very similar picture as they went into the promised land. Then the next event talks about the mountains skipping like rams and the hills like lambs. And this is a reference to Moses receiving the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. Exodus 19:18 says, Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And so, again, the presence of God caused the mountains and the hills to tremble. And then finally, verse 8, right? Who turns the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a spring of water. That happened in Horeb, water coming from a rock at God's command through Moses in Numbers chapter 20. So Psalm 114 refers to each of these stories and gives this overall effect that nature continually serves God and answers to his will. Now, a question that I'd like for us to think about is, just as we consider this point, that nature tells us an awful lot about God. Now, there was a lot of supernatural things going on in this passage, but we can just go out into nature and see an awful lot about the presence of God, right? We talk an awful lot, how could there be such a creation without a creator? And those who talk about things evolving over time is a real stretch just from a very basic looking at what's out there. But my question is, what have you in this room, there's a lot of people, and these people, I think, across all of us, we've been a lot of places. Anybody have a place in particular where you were sort of overwhelmed by either the beauty of it or the power of God that you saw in a particular place? Anybody got an example of that?
Alaska.
Mindy? Alaska. And so what about it was?
The mountains still and the icebergs all in one picture, and then you had the killer whales jumping up, and you had all of the mountains and the snow caps.
So just the beauty of everything you saw there, sort of the pristine of Alaska. What else? Jason?
Niagara Falls.
And probably the power there, right?
Well, it's just to think that he could contain water. I mean, it's one of the more powerful forces on earth when it's moving, and it's just unreal to see.
Right. Yes, sir.
And I'm going to say the Niagara Falls, but from a different perspective. I was there in the winter, and the mist off of the Niagara Falls forms an ice mound that goes above the fall, and the water disappears under the ice. It's the most gorgeous thing you've ever seen.
Wow. That's impressive. What else? Anybody?
In Guatemala, 1 year there was a bad volcano and we couldn't go through, and then the next year when we went through, and they had chiseled out 30 feet of lava that had gone over the road, and just that there had been 30 feet deep of melted rock.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Mark? The beauty of it. Yeah. Just all these places, right? And I think I mentioned earlier this quarter that, when we went to Hawaii, that there was a place on the road to Hana that we stopped, and I think I told y'all I couldn't stop taking pictures, right? It was like everywhere I turned, it was like postcard. It was just so beautiful, right? And I think we've all, seen places like that. Some of them close to us. But just to see, when we think about the power of God just in nature, but to create all of this beauty as well. It doesn't even have to be about holding the sea back to see the power and the majesty of God, and to know that this is the God that we serve is the one who created all of this. It helps us, it should, with our spirituality. This is the God we serve. This is where we're looking to, right? It's not what's in that horoscope or that fortune cookie. This is the true and living God who created everything that we enjoy. Let's go to a second passage. Well, actually, I don't want to leave yet. So, one of the things when we deal with a passage like this is that that we struggle with, okay, well, if I could see the Jordan parted, then I would understand the power of God. If I could see the Red Sea parted, if I could see these things. As I was studying for this, one of the writers I was reading said, it's sort of like the little boy who says, God's not as interesting as he used to be. When he was taught about all of the the Old Testament miracles and wonders and things that he saw. But that's not really true. But it's understandable through the eyes of a young one that they might say that, right? Because sometimes we struggle with understanding the power and majesty of God in a different time. And so question for us is, does he still provide for us today in a very different time and a different situation? And there's a couple things I want to share here before we go to the next psalm. And one is that God is active now as he was then. When we study God's word and go about our daily walk, we need to remember that the God we read about in Scripture is just as real as he was in Moses' time. He cares for us now, just like he cared for Israel long ago. He loved Israel. He manifested his love by leading them and protecting them and providing for them. But the gospel tells us that he does the same thing for us. Matthew 7 says, ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you'll find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it will be opened. And the problem that we often face here is, and we've had classes about this and we've talked about it, and it always will escape us to some degree, is in today's world we have to trust in the providence of God. That God does what he says he will do. That if we ask, he will give. That he answers our prayers. But they don't come in the form of a supernatural activity, but we still have to trust that they happen, although we may not ever even understand that they happen, or they may happen on God's timeline and not on ours, or they may happen after our life is over when it comes to the things that we might be asking of God. But God does still do what he does what he says he will do. That is, if we ask, he'll provide, just as he did back in their time. God will save us as he saved Israel in the Mosaic age. In Exodus 14:13, Moses told the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. And of course, that was the day that they passed through and were protected, the Red Sea, and protected by the Lord. It's the same for our journey through this life. Paul wrote in Ephesians 2:8, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not of your own doing, it's the gift of God. So just as those Israelites received, they were saved from the Egyptians through the power of God, we're saved in the same way, just in a different sense, with the power of God. God carries out his plans differently now, but we should never conclude that he's ceased to act or that he's no longer as powerful as he once was. He just works providentially rather than miraculously. So the natural world and all the things we've just talked about give us a sense of God, but they amaze people who don't know anything about God as well. But they always try to settle for something less than God when they see nature. And so true spirituality begins with an awareness of ourselves and our rightful place. The realization that something greater than us exists. In the case of Psalm 114, the psalm shows that nature itself submits to God. Our second point is going to come from Psalm 40. So we see true spirituality when we look at the power of God in nature, but second of all, in Psalm 40, we see true spirituality involving realizing that we can trust in our great God. So it's not just enough to know that God's there and God's powerful, but we can trust in God. And so let's read Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a stone, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. You have multiplied, O Lord my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts toward us. None can compare with you. I will proclaim and tell of them, yet they're more than can be told. In sacrifice and offering you have not delighted, but you've given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you've not required. Then I said, behold, I've come. In the scroll of the book it's written of me. I will delight to do your will, O God. Your law is within my heart. I've told the glad news of deliverance in the congregation. Behold, I've not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. I've not hidden your deliverance within my heart. I've spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I've not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the congregation. As for you, O Lord, you will not restrain your mercy from me. Your steadfast love and your faithfulness will ever preserve me. For evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head. My heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. Let those be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt. Let those be appalled because of their shame who say to me, aha, aha. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, great is the Lord. As for me, I'm poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought of me. You're my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God. Having a sense for the greatness of God is a first step to knowing him. And that was the first point we made tonight. But in addition to that, we need to know that we can trust in God. That God's not just distant and powerful, but he's also personal and he cares for us. And in this psalm, David described the God who responded to him in his need. Even though trouble and persecution was surrounding David, God had lifted him out of his suffering and had put him on solid ground. Psalm 40 begins by David stating, I waited patiently for the Lord. You know, if we're going to have a true relationship with the Lord, waiting will have to be a characteristic of our relationship. You know, we often sing the song, Teach me, Lord, to wait. But how does a godly man or woman wait on the Lord? You know, this is important as we have our relationship with God and as we pray to him, understanding and really having in our hearts and our minds how we need to wait on the Lord it's critical. Without it, we become frustrated, right? We're looking for instant answers to the things that we ask of God. So I want you to consider 3 ways that we need to wait on the Lord. One is that we wait on the Lord in obedience. So while we wait, we obey. We go on doing the commandments of God. When we ask God for something, we don't sit down or we don't go run in the other direction away from God. It means that if we're going to wait on the Lord in obedience, we settle in to do what God has said while we wait on his answers. So we wait on him in obedience. We also wait on him in faith. The believing heart knows that God's going to respond to requests that are made of him, just like we read in Matthew chapter 7. God's answers are going to be within the boundaries of our faith and our needs and God's will. And then the third thing we do, we wait on him in obedience and we wait on him in faith, but we also wait on him in confidence because our faith produces assurance. We talked about this a little bit earlier, right? But we might not see God's answers for a long time. We might not ever really see them or comprehend them specifically at all. But our trust in God gives us the expectation that he'll faithfully do what he said he would do. So We need to learn how to be good waiters. Waiting is an expression of faith. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says we walk by faith and not by sight. So the Christian walk is a spiritual walk with God, and he's absolutely faithful to his children. We need to grow to the point that we don't mind waiting on God because of the anticipation and the understanding that he's going to answer us, and that his answers will be better than the questions or the requests that we ask, and that we have the patience to wait on him because he knows better than us. If you'll go in Psalm 40 to verses 6 through 10, I want to talk for a minute about some of the characteristics of a faithful servant as we continue to talk about this idea of our relationship with God, the spirituality. So just going back in that part of the psalm again, it says, "In sacrifice and offering you've not delighted, but you've given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you've not required. Then I said, behold, I've come. In the scroll of the book it's written of me. I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. I've told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I've not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. I've not hidden your deliverance within my heart. I've spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I've not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation." So let's use this passage and talk about some of the things, the characteristics of a faithful servant of God. The first one is a faithful servant serves from the heart. It's not just about what I have to do. It's more of what can I do to serve the Lord. We see beyond the ritual of offering sacrifices to the sincere heart needed to make those sacrifices acceptable. This idea of burnt offering and sin offering you've not required. We go beyond that mindset of what do I have to do to satisfy God, to a more mature mindset of what can I do? What is everything that I can possibly do to serve God for all that he's done for me? So faithful servant serves from the heart. A faithful servant is obedient. And he wants to obey all of God's commands. And our life is dedicated to keeping it. A faithful servant of God finds serving God a delight. That's what verse 8 says. I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. You know, God's commandments are not a burden. They're a joy. And a faithful servant has allowed God to mold his thinking to be transformed, for our will to become what God's will is. And then the last characteristic I want to talk about is that a faithful servant of God shares God's loving kindness with others. We can't help but speak of God's goodness among God's people. That's these words here talking about the glad news of deliverance, talking among the congregation. So here when I think about faithful servants of God, just people that you can't be around without them talking about their faith, right? You know those people, don't you? I think we should all aspire to be those people, right? Sometimes I think, how many people do I know who know me who really haven't heard much about my walk with God? That's a problem, right? I mean, that's what we're supposed to be, the light to the world, right? And so sometimes sometimes I may appease myself by saying, well, they know I'm a good guy, right? They don't hear me cuss. Or, they know that, that I go to church, right? But it needs to be something more than that, right? I mean, part of our walk needs to be more than that. We need to be talking about our relationship with God. It's more, a lot of it is the way we live our lives, right? That's our opportunity to open doors with others. But eventually it's got to be more than that, right? It's got to be explaining more about why I am what I am, right? And so that's something for all of us to consider, right? Those people that we come in contact with, every day we're laying that foundation. But sometimes it's time to stop doing just the living of our lives in front of others and to get a little deeper, right? And to begin to talk about our relationship with God. Our final point for tonight comes from Psalm 19. So let's go to Psalm 19. So we've talked about that true spirituality comes from realizing the greatness, the awesomeness, the power of God. It comes from realizing that we can trust in God. And this last point is that true spirituality means personal communication with God. And so that we have, this really brings it home, right? There is, God exists and He's all powerful and He created everything. I can trust in Him, but now the relationship that I have with Him through His Word and how it influences my life through my prayer life to Him. Let's read Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the world, and their words to the end of the world, through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them He has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandments of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Declare me innocent from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the word of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. This study that we're doing together, trying to cover 3 Psalms in a class period, it's sometimes almost criminal, right, to skip so much out of these Psalms and keep moving. But we're trying to cover a lot of territory here. Psalm 19 is one of the most popular of all the Psalms, and it would be a great shame to only spend 5 minutes on it. C.S. Lewis said of Psalm 19, I take this to be the greatest poem in the Psalter and one of the greatest lyrics in the world. And it is. Did you see when we hit that part there in verses 7 through 11, and we're going to talk about that. I mean, when it just tells us all of this about, it is so rich in information. And if you want to break down this psalm, we can really break it down in sort of 3 parts. It tells us about the glory of God in 3 ways. The glory of God is reflected by His world in the first 6 verses. Verses 7 through 11, the glory of God is revealed by His word. And then verses 12 through 14, the glory of God is received by His servant. I want to spend some time talking about specifically verses 7 through 10 and talking about what the scriptures do for us. And like I said, I just don't feel quite right trying to squeeze that into 3 minutes. So we're going to stop right there, and we're going to start back with Psalm 19 next Wednesday night. Thanks.